Okay, we are going to move on to our next speaker, Gita. Gita, are you there? There you are.
I
Hello.
am. Yep. Hi. Can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and you can get your PowerPoint set up while I give you a quick
Okay.
introduction.
Yep.
Okay, Gita is a conservation ecologist at the Nature Conservancy in Arizona, and she's also a member of the Southwest Sea Partnership Steering Committee. She participated in our strategic planning process in 2021 and is now going to give an update on that progress. Thanks so much, Gita, for volunteering to do this. And you're all set. I can see your
All right.
slides.
Excellent. And you guys see the right one. You don't see the presenter slide.
Yep.
Yay. After a couple years, we maybe finally have learned how to use Zoom properly. So, all right. It's an honor to be here with all of the rest of you guys and to be able to give a little bit of an update on the strategic planning process that brings in pieces of just about everything that just about everybody has talked to today. So it's also smart planning to have this towards the end of the second day because it does reference so many of these other pieces. So, all right. So along with the scope of the Southwest Sea Partnership, the scope of the strategic planning process, the scope of the strategic plan rather, matches. So we were asked as a group to help develop and refine a strategic plan that would cover the whole scope of Southwest Sea Partnership's activities. So 8 ecoregions, 2 states. You saw a version of this slide from Ashley that has dots on it that represent the some of the seed collecting activities. An index, if you will, of where there's been more activities and where there's been less. But you can also see from this how many of the ecoregions span both states. So how many of these areas could really benefit from the kind of coordination and integration that Southwest Sea Partnership has undertaken and is now thinking about next steps for. So, all right. Another way of looking at the scope of this is that it goes all the way from New Mexico, Arizona mountains, topping out at 13,000 peaks, all the way down to the bottom of the Sonoran Desert. So a really wide range of ecosystem types. Let's see, I calculated the acres it was, or square miles. Something like 200,000 square miles covered by the plan. And interesting, another way of looking at the scale of it and the scope is to look at the scale. And there's activities in the strategic plan that go from the scale of the individual plants and individual seed types to the kinds of disturbance regimes that cover many, many thousands of acres, and so are creating the sort of large scale challenges and large scale needs. So all right, so along with that really broad scope, Southwest Sea Partnership recruited a broad set of thinkers for the steering committee. If you take the time to read everybody's tagline in here, you'll see that they range from that there's a pretty good even split between folks who are based in New Mexico, folks who are based in Arizona, and folks whose responsibilities naturally extend across that whole geography. When you get to know some of these folks, you'll also discover that their expertise ranges from the really broad scale sort of systemic challenges to those very specific detailed location-based and sort of grounded knowledge. So I will say from a personal standpoint that the biggest reward of participating in this steering committee has been interacting with all of these folks who bring such a broad range of expertise and such deep knowledge and such passionate commitments to what we're all working on. So thanks you guys for the opportunity to participate in it. So, all right, the plan itself. We were given a challenge at the beginning of the plan to make sure that it would create a roadmap to help guide the Southwest Seed Partnership for the next 5 years through 2026. And along that way to navigate some really complex terrain. And then the plan also attempts to set some benchmarks that we can use to assess progress, identify what next steps are, and plan what work would make the most sense with new funding. The plan also attempts to be an outreach tool to basically recruit and integrate other partners who would like to participate in this and whose role might be quite different one from the next. Melanie gave a really good introduction to that sort of collaborative approach where everybody does the piece that makes the most sense for them. So a plan like this, if it's done well, can integrate those roles and help them make sense all together in ways that they might not individually. So, and lastly, the goal of the plan is to jumpstart the work, the really thoughtful and focused work for 2022. So, all right, so what did we actually do? We got together on Zoom every single month from last April till now. Melanie and Maria brought in draft goals and objectives that they have put a lot of thought into. So we're really good starting points, but they also brought a desire to be critiqued and to modify and change and play with these the drafts that they brought in, the ideas that they brought forward. So how it worked was we started out each meeting, we worked on 1 or 2 goals at a time, which gave us a chance to then dig into the objectives that are tiered to those goals, to each of those goals, and to think through things like benchmarks. And I will say also, it really helped as a practice tip. It really helped to have a professional facilitator guide the flow of those meetings so that we could all participate, including Maria and Melanie, in thinking through the hard questions. So, all right, so it came up with, or we ended up with 4 broad but interconnected goals. So I'm going to go through each one super briefly, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into a little bit more specifics of just a couple of them. And if there are pieces that people want to dive into a little bit more, I have some extra slides at the end that have a little bit more on some of the other goals. It's always a balancing act between giving enough detail that you can dig into it and death by PowerPoint. So here we go. All right. First goal is assessing the needs and gaps, really getting a better sense of where the supply and demand chains line up and where they don't line up, and what people actually feel like they need, what kinds of seeds and what amounts they need, what is available, what others are growing, etc. Second goal is to expand the capacity so that there are, in fact, more native plant materials developed across both states. And there are some clear places where there's more of this than others. A third piece that fits very nicely in there, supporting farmers and nurseries so that expanded capacity is sustainable and helps develop the sort of restoration economy that we would all really like to see. And lastly, to deliver research-based techniques and tools that that take the time to do deeper dives into what works and what doesn't, and uncover the surprises that we might otherwise get tripped up by in the future, or test out the innovations and the great new ideas. So, all right. Goals. Goal 1, I'm going to dive into just a little bit more. This is an example of the kinds of more specific objectives that are tiered to each of the broad goals. For each of these, the plan dives even deeper into these what do we call them? Okay, 5 minutes. Benchmark, what do we call these? Milestone tables. There we go. So pulling out each task, listing who is involved in that task. I think perhaps most importantly, talking about the expected result of that task. What if we do the things that we are saying we want to do and think are important? What's going to change in the world? What's different after we're done than it was when we started? And then how we're going to measure those. So, all right. So I want to give just a super brief example of this with the goals. Folks have talked about seed surveys. How do we, just basically asking people, what are they growing? What do they need? But we've also discovered collectively that that question often comes up. People come up with a big fat blank. They don't know what they need 3 to 5 years from now. And so one of the things that the group really worked through, and I think expanded in the strategic plan from the draft, was this recognition that actually forecasting and projecting seed needs is something that is a big enough obstacle that it needs to be addressed, and that there actually are some ways to help people get better at it. So that went into the objectives as a really sort of a point with more emphasis than it had been in the draft. So now you get a little window into what happens when you bring a bunch of stakeholders to the table and they really hash through things. I'm going to skip through a couple of these. Goals. The third goal of supporting farmers. This one was especially interesting to me because I have close colleagues, one of whom is down here on the corner, Mark Haberstich, who are in the midst of the challenge of trying to grow seeds and trying to build out some of these like expansion fields. We've also had some partners who had mixed successes with their own new farm fields, and so personal experience in the realm of actually needing support for more support for farmers and nursery folks to really expand this to any great scale. So I was super happy to be part of thinking through how that might happen. And as an example of that, you'll find in the plan when it's out, some tables like this that talk about some key challenges. Sustainable native seed industry as a key challenge. There are pieces of the plan that sort of walk through how the goals and objectives from each of these, from the needs assessment, the expansion, the producer support, and the tool delivery, how all of those pieces can contribute to really revolutionizing, hopefully, the playing field in order to really foster a sustainable industry. So, all right, last goal, delivering delivering and sharing this kind of information in forums like this. The plan also has timelines and details and all of the juicy stuff that you guys will get to dig into when it's all released. not too far from now. So there are just a few final steps in this strategic planning process. There's a pre-final draft goes to our steering committee later in January. We get to review it, finalize it, and it will hopefully be out and ready for folks to participate in the next couple months. So we're excited about it. Yeah, it's been an honor to be part of the process and a pleasure to be working with all of you guys. And with that, it is time for questions. And I hope that some of the other folks who are part of the steering committee and folks like Melanie and Maria can chime in and help answer questions.
Thanks so much, Gita, for that overview of the strategic planning process. So not seeing any questions come in yet. Feel free to type questions into the Q&A box. Oh, someone's asking in the chat if that picture was mouse prints.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Tiny little baby steps.
Yep. Well, you kind of have to catch the mice and then you know, put their feet on the ground and test, find out which.
So here's a question that came in. So all of the work that these regional seed partnerships doing is awesome, and it seems like there's a lot of government and nonprofit buy-in. However, it seems like a big player is missing in this broad conversation about restoration, and that is the industries and companies that are often responsible for the degradation of public and private lands. How can these partnerships solicit funding and participation from industries like oil and gas or timber? It's a great question.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And I think the answer to that question will be absolutely key in being able to sort of solve the issues of market sustainability. One, you know, example of that is just so we constantly find ourselves in catch-22s where agencies, let's take for example you know, a power line or new gas line, you know, some big disturbance event on the landscape, and it's crossing private land and it's crossing public land, and there's a NEPA analysis that has to happen before it gets approved, and so, you know, there are analyses being done, you know, 5 to 10 years out from the time that the disturbance actually happens, and yet by the time anybody involved asks what seeds are in the cooler, it's too late to have done the seed development and the increaser fields. And so the company ends up getting away with using much less desirable seed sources because the agencies won't require a company to use a product that's not commercially available in the quantities that they need. So it's an absolute catch-22, but it could have been fixed with the lead time that they actually had. So yeah, it's a really important question, and I would love to hear folks' ideas of how to crack that nut, how to put that solution and that problem together. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious if anybody else on yeah, those are all great points, Gita, about the challenges with that. Curious if other people involved have things maybe they could type into the chat. But thank you for that great question. Yeah. There's a couple of questions about kind of the logistics of the strategic planning process that are kind of interesting. So first, did you all type the strategic plan together? I'm picturing like through a Google Doc, or was there a point person for that?
Maria and Melanie and John did the bulk of that kind of logistical stuff, and it went more smoothly than other group remote projects I've been involved in. So so I will say whatever they did, it worked, because we didn't spend all of our time like reformatting the same thing so it fit in a box. So Yeah, I think they did a lot of homework in between. They took a lot of notes on the conversations. We did some wordsmithing at the time, and then they did a lot of homework to bring us back a revised version that incorporated all the stuff we talked about.
That makes sense. And then do you have a facilitator at every meeting, and how long were your meetings about the strategic plan? And also a congrats on getting so much done.
Yes, John was a facilitator for all of the meetings. I don't think he missed any, at least I missed a meeting, so he was there in all of them. What did we have? I think they were 1.5-hour meetings, weren't they, you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything shorter, we just, we weren't quite done yet with that, with whatever topic we were chewing on.
That seems, yeah, valuable to have that facilitator and to keep meetings to a manageable time. Someone says that they would love the template to use as a how-to for other states. So I imagine when that's released, that'll be available for folks to look at as a template. It looks like there's a question that just popped up in the chat. I'm not sure what this is referring to. Maybe it says, could project applications ask applicant to identify its suppliers on the app so no one is caught up short? From Margot. Margot, if you want to clarify, or if Gita, if you have want to tackle that one.
Yeah, I think I know more or less what Margot's asking, but you know, could and I may get it wrong, but what I'm reading in that is, could a project, could someone who is in the midst of a NEPA analysis for doing some kind of disturbance activity, could they be required to identify upfront their seed suppliers? And I think that actually would be a really good idea. I think there are probably, and other people can correct me on this, but I think that there are some limitations in NEPA of what you can ask for a proponent to invest money in, because you're not guaranteeing until the final decision, you're not guaranteeing that they'll get permission to do what they're asking to do. But I think that's also a solvable issue, and asking them to at least identify where their sources would be a really big, would be a really good starting point.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Gita. And with that, there are no more questions. So I think we're moving into a break now, and I'll hand it over to Maria.
All right, stop share. There.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Alexis. You can go ahead and give the announcement.
Okay, I just had 2 announcements. One is that we will be closing the photo contest now and selecting the winner based on the most likes. And then we created a couple polls just to get a little bit of feedback from everybody. You can find them in the on the left hand in the navigation board there, where it says resources, and then there's polls over there, kind of just under the win a prize and leaderboard. And so just looking for a little bit of feedback from everybody. And we're going to take a quick 15-minute break, and we'll be back at 2:45 Pacific time with our Southwest Grower panel. So thanks, everybody. See you in a bit.